The night my daughter appeared at my door, shaking in the rain, I saw the terror in her eyes and knew the man I once trusted had destroyed everything we built. It was nearly midnight when the knocking started, sharp and uneven like someone too desperate to wait. I remember glancing at the clock on the wall, thinking no one ever came by this late unless it was bad news. I had just finished washing the last dish, my back aching, my hands still damp. For a moment I considered pretending not to hear. But the knocks grew harder, more frantic, and something inside me, mother's instinct I guess, told me this wasn't a stranger. I opened the door and there she was. My daughter, Hannah. My heart stopped. She looked like she'd walked through a storm both outside and inside her soul. Her hair was soaked, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her clothes clung to her like they wanted to keep her from falling apart. When she saw me, she didn't speak. She just crumpled, knees giving out, and I barely caught her before she hit the floor. "Hannah! Honey, what happened?" I said, pulling her inside. She was trembling so badly her teeth chattered. I wrapped her in a blanket, guiding her to the couch. Her lips moved, but no words came. Only when I touched her face did she flinch, and that's when I saw it. The bruise along her jaw, deep purple, angry and raw. My heart turned to fire. I brushed her hair aside and saw more. Faint marks near her throat, scratches on her wrists, the kind you don't get from accidents. "Who did this to you?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. Her eyes filled with tears and she whispered one name that made my blood run cold. "Nathan," I froze. Nathan, her husband. The man she swore was kind, patient, gentle. The man who stood in my kitchen a year ago, promising to cherish her for life. I remembered his smile that day, how easily he charmed everyone. But beneath that smile, I had always felt something off. Something I couldn't name. She started talking, haltingly, as if each word was a confession she'd been too afraid to say. He had been drinking again. They argued about money, about the land her father left her. She found out he'd forged her signature on papers she never saw, papers that transferred her property to his company. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He laughed, told her no one would believe her anyway. Then he shoved her so hard she hit the counter. I felt my hands shaking. I wanted to storm out of that house right then, to drive to his place and drag him out by the collar. But Hannah needed me calm. She needed safety first, vengeance later. I forced my voice steady and said, "You're home now. You're safe. He won't touch you again." She looked at me with eyes so tired I thought she might break in half. "He said if I talk, he'll ruin us both," she whispered. I brushed away her tears and held her close. "He's already ruined himself." The rain outside turned heavier, pounding the roof like war drums. I sat there holding her, listening to the sound, feeling anger burn beneath my ribs. I'd spent 20 years in law enforcement before I retired, but I'd never felt fury like this, not even when I saw the worst of humanity. Because this time it wasn't a case file. It was my daughter. When she finally fell asleep, curled on the couch like a child again, I covered her with a quilt. I watched her chest rise and fall and thought about all the nights I'd prayed she'd find happiness. That prayer now felt like a cruel joke. I walked into the kitchen, my reflection faint in the window, the storm lighting flashes behind me. Somewhere between the thunder and my own heartbeat, I made a vow. I would not let him win, not through fear, not through lies, not through silence. I picked up her phone from the coffee table. It was buzzing with messages. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but the screen kept lighting up with his name. Nathan. I glanced down and saw part of a message. "You'll regret this. I always get what's mine." Something inside me went cold. I took screenshots of everything, every threat, every curse. My mind was already moving like the detective I used to be, methodical, sharp, unforgiving. I opened my old desk drawer and pulled out a camera, the one I hadn't touched since my last case. I took photos of her bruises, careful, quiet, tears blurring the lens. Every flash felt like a promise of justice. Then I went to my closet. The smell of leather and old memories hit me as I reached for my uniform. My badge was still pinned where I'd left it, shining faintly under the dim light. I hadn't worn it in years, but tonight it didn't feel like a relic. It felt like armor. I fastened it to my chest and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't retired. She wasn't just a mother. She was someone reborn out of rage and love. I dialed an old number, Gabriel, a lawyer I once worked with in Austin, one of the few men I ever truly trusted. He answered half asleep. "Margaret, it's been years. I need your help," I said. "It's Hannah." He hurt her. He forged land deeds, and he's threatening her life. He didn't waste time. Do you have evidence? "I'm gathering it," I said. "But I'll need protection orders by sunrise." "I'll handle it." "Don't confront him yet." "Too late for that," I murmured. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents. Her phone, the photos, the bruises burned into my mind. I felt the tremor of fear, yes, but beneath it was something stronger. Determination. I poured a cup of coffee, though I didn't taste it. The first light of dawn began to crawl through the curtains, soft and fragile. I looked at my daughter sleeping in the next room, wrapped in the safety I'd built around her, and realized this was just the beginning. Because when someone hurts your child, there's no such thing as peace. There's only the storm you bring upon them, and mine was coming. I left that pawn shop with my hands trembling and my heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. The rain had started to pour, cold and relentless, matching the storm inside me. Robert's smirk, that arrogant look of a man who believed he owned the world, owned my daughter, burned in my mind. Every word he said echoed like poison. She deserved it. Those 3 words tore something open inside me I didn't even know was still there. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring through the windshield as raindrops slid down the glass like silent tears. My mind spun between rage and helplessness, between the badge I once wore and the mother I now was. I wanted justice, but I also wanted him to feel pain. Real pain. The kind that doesn't heal. When I finally turned the key and drove off, I didn't go home. I drove to the station. The building hadn't changed much since I retired. Same gray walls, same flickering fluorescent light in the corner. Captain Rosales was still there. Older now, slower maybe. But when he saw me, his face softened in that way only old friends can. "Liz," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "I have evidence," I replied, my voice rough. "And I'm not walking away this time." He studied me for a long second. "You're too close to this. You know how this works. The system let my daughter get beaten, Captain," I cut in sharply. "The system ignored her calls because her husband had money and influence. The system is broken, and I'm done watching it fail." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "What do you have?" I opened the folder. Photos, hospital records, hidden camera footage I'd taken from the nanny cam in Sarah's living room, and a sworn statement from her friend Olivia who'd witnessed one of the fights. It was all there. Months of work, sleepless nights, and guilt wrapped in paper. He took a deep breath. "You realize," he said slowly, "this is enough to start a case. But if we go forward, there's no turning back. He'll fight dirty. I'm counting on it," I said. By morning, the report was filed. Robert wouldn't see it coming. Not from me, not yet. But when I got home that night, Sarah was sitting on my porch steps, soaked from the rain, hugging her knees. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. "Mom," she whispered when she saw me. "He knows." My heart stopped. "What do you mean he knows?" She shook her head, trembling. "He said someone told him. He came to the clinic, Mom. He said if I try to take him to court, he'll ruin me. He'll take Ethan. He'll make sure no one believes me." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her body shake against mine. I wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but I couldn't lie to her anymore. "He won't win," I said instead, holding her tighter. "Not this time." That night I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house like a ghost, every creak of the floor reminding me of how fragile everything was. Then around midnight I heard something. A car engine. Headlights cut through the window. My gut twisted. I looked outside, Robert's black truck. He was parked across the street, engine idling, watching. He didn't come to the door. He just sat there, waiting, testing me. I called Rosales. "He's here," I said. "Don't do anything, Liz. We'll send a patrol." But by the time the cruiser arrived, the truck was gone. The next morning, I found a note on my windshield. "You can't protect her forever." My hands clenched so hard the paper crumpled instantly. That was the moment I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to defend Sarah anymore. I was going to end this. I spent the next 2 days gathering what I needed: bank statements, transfer receipts, copies of Robert's offshore accounts, hidden under his cousin's name. I'd worked too long in law enforcement not to know where to dig. Every time I uncovered another layer of his corruption, I felt the fire inside me grow hotter. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice on the phone was steady, professional. "This is Detective Graham with the DA's office. We've reviewed your file. We believe there's enough to open a criminal investigation against Robert Langford for domestic abuse and financial fraud." I almost dropped the phone. My throat tightened. "Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. But we'll need your daughter to testify." That was the hard part. Sarah wasn't ready. She was terrified. And when I told her, she broke down. "Mom, he'll destroy me," she sobbed. "He'll find a way." I took her hands and looked her in the eyes. "Honey, he already has. The only thing left is to take your power back." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with trembling lips, she nodded. 2 days later, we walked into the courthouse together. My stomach was in knots, but I held her hand like she was still my little girl walking into her first day of school. Robert was already there, sitting with his attorney, his suit crisp, his smirk still plastered on that smug face. He didn't even glance at Sarah, just looked at me, as if daring me to make a move. The hearing was short, procedural, but the air was thick with tension. When Sarah finally took the stand, her voice was shaky, but her words cut deep. She described everything: the threats, the bruises, the nights she locked herself in the bathroom while he banged on the door screaming. People in the courtroom gasped. Even the judge's expression hardened. But Robert's lawyer tried to twist it, painting her as emotional, unstable, seeking attention. My blood boiled. I wanted to leap up and shout, but I held it in. Not yet. Not here. After the hearing, Robert brushed past me in the hallway, leaning close enough that I could smell the cologne I once bought for his birthday. "You think you can win?" he whispered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I smiled, cold and steady. "Neither do you." That night, I sent the last piece of evidence to the DA, one video I hadn't shown anyone yet. It wasn't just about the abuse. It was proof that Robert had bribed an officer to make previous reports disappear. The man who'd once sworn to protect had been on his payroll. The next morning, headlines broke: "Local businessman under investigation for domestic abuse and police corruption." Robert's empire started to crumble, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of hope in Sarah's eyes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The morning after the headlines exploded, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Everywhere I went, the grocery store, the post office, even the church, people whispered. Some offered sympathetic glances, others turned away, afraid of being dragged into the storm. But I didn't care about gossip. I cared about one thing only: protecting my daughter and my grandson. Sarah hadn't left the house in days. She sat on the couch most mornings, clutching her coffee mug like it was her lifeline. The bruises had faded from her skin, but not from her spirit. "Mom," she said softly one morning, staring out the window, "do you think people will ever see me as more than what he made me?" I set my hand on hers. "You're not what he did to you. You're what you survived." Her eyes glistened. She nodded, but the pain didn't lift. Trauma doesn't vanish with headlines. It lingers, like smoke after a fire. Then came the knock on the door. 2 sharp raps. I tensed immediately. Sarah froze. I peeked through the curtain. It was Detective Graham. Relief washed over me, but only slightly. His expression was tight, serious. "We have a problem," he said once inside. Robert's lawyer filed a motion to suppress the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. They're arguing your surveillance footage violates privacy laws. My heart sank. You can't be serious. That footage is the reason this case exists. I know, Graham said. But he's got powerful connections. The judge reviewing this motion, let's just say she's not exactly known for siding with victims. I clenched my fists. So what happens now? We fight back, he replied. But we'll need to find something that can't be disputed. Something personal. Something that shows intent. That night, I went through the box of old things Sarah had left behind after her wedding. Letters, photos, trinkets. The remnants of a love she once believed in. I found an envelope sealed with gold wax, tucked behind a framed picture of her and Robert at their engagement party. Inside were handwritten notes, dozens of them, all from Robert. At first they seemed harmless, romantic even. But the deeper I read, the darker they became. Threats disguised as affection. You're mine. You'll never leave me. I decide what's best for us. It was all there in his handwriting. His arrogance, his control, his obsession. The next morning, I took them straight to Detective Graham. He read through a few, then looked up at me, eyes wide. This is gold. It's not just abuse. It's psychological domination, documented in his own words. I felt a glimmer of victory, but it was short-lived. That evening, as Sarah and I sat down to dinner, we heard glass shatter in the back of the house. Sarah screamed. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the counter and rushed toward the sound. A rock lay on the kitchen floor, surrounded by shards of glass. A note was tied to it. Drop the case or I'll make you watch her fall. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever did it was long gone. Sarah was sobbing, holding Ethan tight in her arms. The officer took the note, promised patrols, promised protection. But I could see it in his eyes. The same doubt, the same hesitation. They were afraid to touch Robert Langford. After they left, I locked every door, every window, and sat in the dark living room, gripping the bat like a soldier holding a rifle. My thoughts raced. This wasn't random. He wanted to scare us, to break us before the trial began. But he underestimated me. He didn't know what happens when you corner a mother who has nothing left to lose. At dawn, I made a decision. If the law couldn't protect us, I would expose him myself. I reached out to an old contact, Laura Whitman, an investigative journalist I'd worked with years ago on a corruption case. When she picked up the phone, I didn't waste time. Laura, I've got a story that'll blow this town apart. She met me 2 hours later at a diner off Route 14, wearing her usual trench coat and sharp expression. I handed her a flash drive. Inside are records of bank transfers, letters, and police reports that disappeared. Robert paid off officers. I have names, dates, everything, she raised an eyebrow. And you're sure you want this public? It's going to get ugly. I'm already living ugly, I said. He came after my family. I won't stay silent. She nodded slowly, then smiled. Then let's burn his mask off. 2 days later, Laura's article went live. It didn't just expose Robert. It implicated 2 police officers, a local judge, and even a city councilman. It was everywhere. Television, social media, every screen lighting up with his name and face. Robert Langford, the hidden empire of a violent man. I watched from my kitchen as reporters gathered outside his gated mansion. Sarah sat beside me, trembling. He's going to lose everything, she whispered. I looked at her. Good. Maybe then he'll understand what it's like to be powerless. But deep down, I knew this would provoke him. And I was right. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Enjoying the spotlight, Liz? His voice was calm, too calm. You think this ends with your little article? You have no idea what you've started. Robert, I said, steadying my tone. You brought this on yourself. I warned you, he chuckled darkly. You warned me? You think anyone believes your sob story? You're an old cop with nothing left but anger. Watch yourself. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hand shaking. Not from fear, but from knowing he wasn't bluffing. The next morning, Sarah's car wouldn't start. Someone had slashed the tires. A dead bird lay on the hood, its wings spread, its throat cut. Sarah broke down completely. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she cried. "He's everywhere. He'll never stop." I pulled her close, whispering through tears I didn't even realize had fallen. "He wants us scared. That's his power. But we're not running. We're fighting. You hear me? We fight." And that's when I knew this battle wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. That night, I packed a bag, took my gun from the safe, and looked out into the dark street where shadows seemed to move with every flicker of the streetlight. Somewhere out there, Robert was watching, waiting. But so was I. He wanted war? Then war was exactly what he would get. The silence that night was the kind that pressed on your chest, heavy and suffocating. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the wind felt like a warning. I sat by the window, the gun in my lap, watching the streetlights flicker. Sarah and Ethan were asleep upstairs, but I couldn't close my eyes. I kept seeing Robert's face in the dark, that cruel, mocking smile. He thought fear would break me. He was wrong. It was only sharpening me. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait for him to strike again. I was going to find proof that would bury him for good. Detective Graham had already done what he could legally, but Robert's money had bought him time. I needed something beyond the courtroom, something that spoke the truth in a way no lawyer could twist. I started with the one person who'd know his secrets, Denise Salgado, the Mistress, the woman who'd pretended to be his business consultant while helping him launder money. I tracked her to a boutique hotel on the edge of town. She looked startled when I showed up at her door, still in her silk robe, her hair tousled from sleep. "Elizabeth?" she stammered, clutching the collar of her robe. "What are you—" "Save it," I said sharply. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make you understand what kind of man you're protecting." She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the hallway. "You shouldn't be here." "If Robert finds out, he already has," I interrupted. "And that's why you should be scared. Not of me. Of what he'll do when you're no longer useful." Her expression faltered. She turned away, pacing the room. "You don't understand," she said softly. "He promised me everything. He said he'd leave her, that we'd start over." I almost laughed, bitterly. "That's what he does, Denise. He promises the world and takes your soul instead." She stopped pacing. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw fear, real fear, flicker across her face. "He hit me once," she whispered. "Said it was my fault for asking too many questions. He made me sign something. I don't even know what it was. He said if I talked, I'd regret it. That was it. My gut told me she had something. Maybe the key I needed. Whatever he made you sign, find it," I said. "Bring it to me. I can protect you," she shook her head. "You can't protect anyone from him." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Watch me." 2 nights later, she called. Her voice trembled over the phone. "I found it. Meet me behind the motel on Highway 9. Midnight." My instincts screamed it was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. If she really had the document, it could prove everything. At exactly midnight, I parked behind the motel, headlights off. The air was thick with fog. Denise stood under a flickering lamppost, clutching a folder to her chest. She looked terrified. "I had to make copies," she whispered. "He'll kill me if he knows I took this." I reached for the folder, and then the world exploded in light. Headlights, tires screeching. A black SUV tore into the lot. I shouted for Denise to run, but it was too late. 2 men jumped out, masks covering their faces. One grabbed her, the other lunged at me. I swung my gun up and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the night. The man hesitated, just enough for me to kick his knee and send him sprawling. Denise screamed, dropping the folder as the other man shoved her into the SUV. The tires screeched again, vanishing into the fog with her inside. I grabbed the folder from the ground, shaking. My hands were bleeding, my heart racing. I wanted to chase them, but I knew I couldn't catch up. I opened the folder under the lamppost. Inside were signed documents, bank transfers, offshore accounts, and one contract in particular that froze my blood. It was a non-disclosure agreement naming Denise, And Sarah. Robert had paid them both hush money under false pretenses, creating a paper trail that could destroy him if exposed. He'd been planning this from the start, silencing them legally, financially, psychologically. I called Detective Graham immediately. "They took her," I said, breathless. "I have the proof, but Denise is gone." "Stay where you are," he ordered. "We'll send units," but I hung up. I wasn't waiting anymore. By sunrise, I was back in my car, driving toward Robert's property on the hill. The gates loomed like prison bars, but I didn't stop. I parked a mile away and walked the rest of the distance through the trees. The world felt too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots on the gravel. I could see movement inside his house, shadows crossing the windows. I crouched behind a hedge and pulled out my phone, recording as I zoomed in. 2 men carried boxes out the back door, loading them into a van. Documents, computers, evidence being destroyed. "Not this time," I whispered. I stepped out, raising my phone, snapping photos. One of the men spotted me and shouted. The van roared to life. I sprinted toward it, my heart hammering. The van skidded away, tires spitting gravel, but not before I got a clear shot of the license plate. Graham's team arrived 20 minutes later. "Jesus, Liz," he muttered. "You could have been killed." "I almost was," I said flatly. "But I got what we need. The footage and documents were enough for a search warrant." By that afternoon, Robert's mansion was crawling with officers. I watched from the sidelines as they led him out in handcuffs, his perfect suit wrinkled, his smirk finally gone. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Robert turned his head just enough to meet my eyes. For the first time, I saw something new in his face. Not arrogance, not rage, fear. As they drove him away, Sarah appeared beside me, tears streaming down her cheeks. She grabbed my hand, trembling. "Is it really over, Mom?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise her peace. But I'd been in this world too long to believe monsters die that easily. "It's a start," I said quietly. That night, the house finally felt still. Sarah tucked Ethan into bed and lingered in the doorway, watching him sleep. "He doesn't deserve any of this," she whispered. "He's just a kid." I touched her shoulder gently. "That's why we fought, sweetheart. So he never has to know the kind of fear we lived in." For a brief moment, I believed we might finally rest. But as I turned off the porch light, I noticed a car parked down the street. Engine running, headlights dimmed, and just like that, the peace shattered again. The car didn't move for almost an hour. Its engine hummed low, steady, like a warning growl in the distance. I stood behind the curtain, the faint orange light from the street lamp cutting across my face. Every instinct I'd ever had as a cop screamed at me that whoever sat in that car wasn't there by accident. My fingers brushed the cold steel of the gun tucked into my waistband. I didn't want to use it. Not again. Not unless I had to. But I'd seen enough to know what came next. When men like Robert start losing control, they don't surrender. They strike back harder. At dawn, the car was gone, but the unease it left behind lingered like a fog that wouldn't lift. I made coffee and waited for Sarah to wake. When she came down the stairs, she looked lighter than I'd seen her in years. There was color in her cheeks again, a spark of hope in her tired eyes. "Mom?" she said softly, pouring herself a cup. "I had a dream last night. I was standing in the middle of a field and it was raining. But the rain wasn't cold. It felt like peace." I smiled faintly, trying to match her calm. "Maybe it's a sign," I said. "Maybe it's time for you to breathe again." She nodded, holding her cup close. "I want to. I really do. But I can't stop looking over my shoulder." "You're safe here," I told her, though even as I said it, part of me didn't believe it. That afternoon, Detective Graham called. His voice was weary but confident. "We've got him locked down for now. The DA's office filed charges for obstruction, tampering, and financial fraud." "Bail's been denied." I exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Thank God," I murmured. "Maybe now she can heal." "Don't celebrate yet," he cautioned. "Men like Robert have allies." If he has anything left to trade, someone might come collecting. The words stayed with me long after we hung up. By evening, Sarah took Ethan to the park. I stayed behind, catching up on bills and trying to remember what normal life used to feel like. I was writing a grocery list when the power suddenly went out. The lights flickered once, then darkness swallowed the house whole. My pulse spiked. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and swept the beam across the room. Everything was silent except the faint ticking of the wall clock, and then a soft creak from the back door. "Sarah?" I called. No answer. I moved slowly toward the sound, every muscle in my body tense. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stilled. My breath hitched. Someone was outside. I switched off the flashlight and waited. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then faintly from outside, a voice. A man's voice. Calm, cold. "You can't hide her forever, Elizabeth." It wasn't Robert. But it was someone who worked for him. I could tell by the tone. That same blend of mockery and confidence. I fired a warning shot through the door. The sound tore through the night like thunder. Then came footsteps retreating fast, tires screeching a moment later. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, listening until everything went still again. My knees nearly buckled. I sank into a chair, clutching the gun against my chest. The adrenaline burned away slowly, leaving only exhaustion and dread. When Sarah returned, I told her everything. Her face went pale. "We can't stay here, Mom," she whispered. "They'll find us. We have to leave." "I'm not running," I said firmly. "This is our home. They can't scare us out." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "They already have. That night we packed anyway. Not because I wanted to flee, but because Ethan deserved to sleep somewhere safe. I called Captain Rosales, and he arranged for us to stay at a safe house the department used for witnesses. Small, secluded, out in the woods near Miller's Creek. We arrived just before midnight. The air smelled of pine and rain. Sarah tucked Ethan into the small twin bed, kissing his forehead. For the first time in weeks, he fell asleep without crying. I sat by the window, the stars glinting faintly through the branches. "Mom," Sarah said softly, sitting beside me, "why do you keep fighting like this? You've done enough." I looked at her. The lines of fear and fatigue etched deep in her face. "Because if I stop now, he wins. And if he wins, he'll do this to someone else." She nodded, biting her lip. "I just want it to end." "It will," I promised, though I wasn't sure when. But sometimes the only way to find peace is to walk through the fire first. We slept for a few hours. At sunrise, my phone buzzed with a message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. "Nice hiding spot. Tell Sarah I said hi." I froze. My stomach dropped. I ran outside. The gravel road was empty, the trees silent. Somehow they'd found us again. By noon, Graham and Rosales were at the cabin. "He can't be contacting you," Graham said, frustrated. "He's in custody." "Then who the hell is doing this?" I demanded. Rosales exchanged a grim look with him. "Someone on the inside. Someone feeding him information." The idea made me sick. I'd trusted those men, worked beside them for decades. Now I didn't know who to believe. That evening, after the detectives left, Sarah sat by the fire with Ethan. She was reading to him, Goodnight Moon, his favorite book. Her voice was soft, gentle, steady. I watched her lips tremble slightly on the words. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "He deserves a childhood without shadows, Mom." I nodded. "And you deserve a life without fear." We went to bed early that night, the fire still crackling in the hearth. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the cabin made me think someone was outside. Around 3 a.m, I heard it again, that same low hum of an engine. I slipped out of bed, gun in hand, and peeked through the blinds. A single black sedan sat at the end of the dirt road. No headlights. Just there. Waiting. I didn't wake Sarah. I crept outside quietly, the cool air stinging my skin. I walked halfway down the driveway and raised my voice. "You picked the wrong woman to follow," I shouted. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the car engine roared to life and sped off, gravel spraying in all directions. I stood there, breath visible in the cold night air, heart pounding so hard it hurt. When I went back inside, Sarah was awake, standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she whispered. I looked at her, my throat tightening. "No," I said softly, "but neither am I." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just defending my daughter anymore. I was hunting the man who'd destroyed her, and anyone who helped him. I wasn't afraid of his shadows, because I had become one myself. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My stomach twisted with a mix of fear and determination. Today was the hearing. The day Sarah would finally face Robert again, this time not as his victim, but as a woman ready to reclaim her life. She sat beside me wearing a modest navy dress and a small silver cross around her neck. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were clear. "Mom," she whispered, "what if he wins? What if he gets away with everything?" I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then we fight again," I said softly. "But he's not walking out untouched. Not this time." Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy with tension. Robert sat at the defendant's table in a crisp gray suit, his attorney, a smooth-talking man named Thomas Hale, leaning toward him with a confident smirk. Denise was there too, sitting a few rows behind him, pretending to look concerned. I could feel her eyes burning into Sarah's back, as if daring her to falter. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart pounded as the case was called. The prosecutor presented the evidence, photos of bruises, hospital reports, police recordings of Sarah's trembling voice describing the night she almost died. Every word tore at my heart, but I stayed composed. I had to be her anchor. Then came Robert's turn to speak. He stood up, straightened his tie, and smiled, a hollow, manipulative smile that I'd seen too many times before. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this has been a terrible misunderstanding. My wife has struggled with emotional instability for years. I was trying to help her, not hurt her. Unfortunately, she's been influenced by people who wish to destroy our marriage, like her mother, who never approved of me." The audacity of his words made me clench my fists. Sarah lowered her head, fighting tears. The judge glanced toward her. "Mrs. Parker, is that true?" Sarah lifted her chin. Her voice quivered but didn't break. "No, Your Honor. I was scared to speak for years. He made me feel worthless. He told me no one would believe me, not even my own mother. But I'm done living in fear. He nearly killed me." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Robert's confident facade cracked for the first time. I caught his eyes, and for a split second, I saw it. Panic. The prosecutor then revealed the forged documents Robert had used to transfer Sarah's inheritance into his name. The judge's face darkened. Thomas Hale tried to object, but the evidence was irrefutable. The clerk handed over the notarized files, each one signed with Robert's false signature. "Forgery," the judge muttered. "And coercion." My heart swelled with both rage and relief. Still, I knew how unpredictable courtrooms could be. I'd seen too many monsters walk free because of technicalities. The hearing adjourned for lunch, and we stepped outside into the cold sunlight. Sarah leaned against a pillar, breathing heavily. "I don't know if I can sit through more of this," she said. "You can," I told her. "You already are." That's when I saw him. Robert stood near the courthouse steps, talking to a reporter. His smile was wide, fake, charming, spinning his lies for the cameras. I walked over before I even realized what I was doing. "Don't you dare twist this into your victory speech," I hissed. "You've hurt enough people," he smirked. "Elizabeth, you should thank me. I made your daughter stronger. Without me, she'd still be that timid little girl you raised." "You broke her," I snapped. "But the thing about broken glass, Robert, it cuts back." He leaned closer, his voice low. "You think you've won? You don't know what I have planned." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving a trail of arrogance in his wake. Something deep inside me stirred, an old instinct from my years on the force. His tone wasn't just bitterness. It was a warning. Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session began. The judge called for closing statements. The prosecutor's argument was clear and powerful, emphasizing the mountain of evidence against Robert. Then it was Thomas Hale's turn again. He tried to discredit Sarah, calling her emotional and unreliable. But when he pushed too far, the judge interrupted sharply, "Enough, counselor. You will treat the victim with respect." The tension broke like a wave. Sarah exhaled shakily. Then, before the judge could finalize the hearing, something unexpected happened. Robert stood up abruptly. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to say one last thing." The judge hesitated but nodded. Robert turned to Sarah. His expression softened into something almost human. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." A hush fell over the room. For a moment, I almost believed it. But then I saw it again, his right hand trembling slightly, hidden in his pocket. My instincts screamed. "Judge!" I shouted, stepping forward. "He's—" But before I could finish, a loud bang echoed through the courtroom. Panic erupted. People screamed. The bailiff tackled Robert to the ground, wrenching a small pistol from his hand. Sarah froze, eyes wide with shock. The judge yelled for order. I rushed to Sarah, wrapping my arms around her trembling body. "You're okay," I whispered, though my own heart thundered in my chest. "You're okay." The officers dragged Robert away, shouting over the chaos. As they passed, he lifted his head and sneered, "You can't silence me, Elizabeth." "Not forever." The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the echo of fear. Outside, reporters swarmed, asking questions, flashing cameras. Sarah buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing quietly. I held her close, shielding her from the world. "He's gone," I murmured. "It's over." But even as I said it, a chill ran down my spine. Because I knew men like Robert. They didn't disappear quietly. They waited, plotted, and returned when you least expected it. And I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't the end. It was only the calm before the next storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. The echo of that gunshot kept replaying in my mind, louder each time. Every blink brought back the image of Robert's eyes, cold, unbroken, even as the officers dragged him away. I sat on the couch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching the soft flicker of the streetlight through the window. Sarah was upstairs, finally asleep after the longest day of her life. The courthouse incident had left her shaken to her core. The prosecutor assured us that Robert would face additional charges for attempted violence, but I knew how slippery he was. He'd always managed to manipulate the system. He could twist words, charm judges, make liars sound like saints. And even now in a cell, I could feel his shadow creeping closer. The next morning, I drove to the precinct to meet with Chief Rosales. He looked up from his desk when I entered, his tired eyes softening with concern. "Elizabeth, I saw the report. Are you both okay?" I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Physically, yes. But he had that gun inside the courtroom, Rosales." "How? How did security miss that?" He rubbed his temples. "We're investigating. The weapon was a compact model, likely slipped through during an earlier recess. The courthouse scanners aren't perfect." I sighed, anger and fear colliding in my chest. He's escalating. He's desperate. If they let him post bail, Sarah won't be safe. Rosales leaned forward. "We'll request a restraining order and round-the-clock protection for both of you. I'll see to it personally." I nodded, grateful but restless. Every instinct told me this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Robert wasn't going to stop until he made us pay. That evening, Sarah sat quietly at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of her teacup with her finger. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think he really meant it? When he said he was sorry?" I hesitated. There was a tiny part of me that wanted to say yes, to believe that maybe, deep down, there was a flicker of remorse in that broken man. But the truth was sharper than that. "No," I said finally. "He said it because he wanted control. It's what abusers do, Sarah. They apologize to disarm you." She looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't understand how someone can love you and hate you at the same time." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Because it's not love," I whispered. "It's possession, and that's what he's losing." 2 days later, I received a call from James Ellison, the lawyer. His tone was grave. "Elizabeth, you need to come to my office. Something's happened." My stomach dropped. When I arrived, he was standing near the window, holding a thick envelope. "Robert's bail was denied," he said. "But that's not the problem. Someone broke into your daughter's house last night." My pulse spiked. "What?" "Nothing was stolen," he continued, "but they trashed the place. Smashed picture frames, broke furniture, ripped her clothes. It looks personal. The police suspect it was one of Robert's associates." I felt the room tilt for a moment. Sarah had just started to breathe again, to sleep through the night. And now this. "Where is she?" I asked quickly. "She's fine," James said. "She was at your house." "But Elizabeth." There was a message on the wall, written in spray paint. He hesitated before speaking. "You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you." My knees nearly gave out. My mind raced through possibilities, through memories of all the people Robert had manipulated over the years. Friends, co-workers, business partners. He'd always surrounded himself with people who owed him favors or feared him. If he couldn't reach us himself, he'd send someone else to do it. I clenched my jaw. "We're not running," I said. "Not this time," James nodded. "Then we have to be smart. We'll file for a full protection order, install security at both properties, and keep communication records in case anything happens." I agreed, but inside I felt something darker forming, a quiet resolve. I wasn't just going to defend my daughter, I was going to end this nightmare once and for all. That night, I found Sarah sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The wind carried the scent of rain, heavy and metallic. She looked small, fragile against the dark sky. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want him to control my life, even from behind bars." I sat beside her, pulling her close. "Then we won't. We'll face whatever comes." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever wish we could just disappear?" I thought about it. About selling the house, changing our names, starting over in some small town where no one knew our story. But then I thought of all the women who couldn't run. The ones still trapped, still afraid to speak. "No," I said. "If we disappear, he wins. If we stand, others see that it's possible to survive." Later that night, long after Sarah had gone to bed, I walked through the house checking every lock, every window. The silence was heavy, the kind that hums in your ears. I paused at the front door, noticing something strange. The mat was slightly shifted, as if someone had stepped on it recently. My breath caught. Slowly, I knelt down and lifted it, and my blood ran cold. Underneath, there was a folded piece of paper. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside, written in black ink, were 6 words. "You can't protect her forever, Liz." My knees buckled, and I gripped the doorframe to stay upright. I rushed to the phone and called Rosales. "Someone's been here," I said, my voice breaking. Within 15 minutes, patrol cars filled the street, lights flashing red and blue across the neighborhood. Officers combed the yard but found no footprints, no witnesses, nothing. Whoever left that note knew what they were doing. Rosales stood in my living room, his expression grim. "He has connections," he said quietly. "Even from jail he can reach people. But we'll put a patrol car outside your house until we figure this out." I nodded, my body trembling. When the officers left, I sat in the living room, staring at that note lying on the table under a plastic evidence bag. Those 6 words burned into my mind. "You can't protect her forever." It wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge. I knew what it meant. Robert was planning something, and the clock had already started ticking. I looked toward the staircase where Sarah was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger crawling closer. And I made a silent vow to myself. Whatever it took, whatever line I had to cross, I would protect my daughter. Even if it meant becoming someone I no longer recognized. Even if it meant going back to the part of me I had buried years ago. The cop who didn't wait for orders. The woman who fought fire with fire. Because when evil refuses to stop, sometimes you can't either. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching as the first hints of light touched the trees outside. The police car parked down the street made me feel both safer and more exposed. Somewhere out there, someone had crossed that line, had come to my home, left that note, and vanished without a trace. And I knew it wasn't random. It was Robert. Even behind bars, he was playing his sick game. At 7, Chief Rosales called. His voice was low and urgent. "Elizabeth, we pulled the security footage from the neighborhood cameras. You need to come down to the station." My pulse quickened. I arrived 15 minutes later. Rosales was standing with 2 detectives in the surveillance room. On the screen, grainy black and white footage showed a figure in a hoodie walking down my street at midnight. The person moved with purpose, head slightly turned away from the cameras. "We tried enhancing the image," Rosales said, "but the face is still unclear." I leaned closer. "Can you trace where they went?" "They came from the east," he said, "and disappeared near the old gas station. But here's the strange part. Before they left your property, they looked straight at the camera and waved." My blood turned cold. A wave, calm, confident. It was taunting, deliberate. Whoever that was wanted me to know they weren't afraid. "Do you think it's one of Robert's men?" I asked quietly. Rosales nodded. "We're looking into it. There's a man named Trevor Knox. Used to work with Robert in his construction business. Did time for assault. He got out 3 weeks ago. We're checking his connections." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the old instinct to hunt, to chase. "If it's Trevor, he won't stop at threats," I said. "He's the kind that finishes what he starts." Rosales sighed. "I know, but Elizabeth, don't do anything reckless. Let us handle this." I nodded, but in my gut, I already knew I wouldn't be able to wait. That night, Sarah sat beside me on the couch, clutching a pillow. "Do you think they'll catch whoever it was?" she asked. "They will," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "You just need to stay close. Don't go anywhere alone." She nodded but didn't look convinced. There was a new fear in her eyes, one that wasn't just about Robert anymore. It was about everything, about being hunted, about not knowing who to trust. I watched her retreat upstairs and felt that same helplessness claw at me. I couldn't let her live like this, hiding in shadows. After she went to bed, I pulled out an old file box from the closet. Inside were my notes from my years on the force, old contacts, addresses, reports. I found one name that stood out, Eddie Ramos, an informant I'd once relied on for cases involving Robert's crew. Eddie owed me a favor. If anyone knew who was moving in Robert's circle now, it would be him. The next morning, I drove to the east side of town, where Eddie worked at a small auto shop that smelled of oil and burnt rubber. He looked up from under the hood of a car when I entered. "Well, if it isn't Officer Monroe," he said with a crooked grin. "Didn't think I'd see you again?" "It's Elizabeth now," I replied. "I need information." He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the counter. "About who?" "Robert Parker." The name alone made his smile fade. "I heard he's inside again." "Guessing that's not stopping him, huh?" "Not even close," I said. "Someone came to my house last night. Left a threat. I think it's one of his people, maybe Trevor Knox." Eddie frowned. "Knox? Yeah, I've seen him around. He's been hanging out at a warehouse near the docks, Robert's old property. Word is he's got something planned, big." I felt my heart tighten. "What kind of big?" "I don't know," he said carefully, glancing around. "But they've been talking about teaching someone a lesson. You and your daughter came up more than once." My breath hitched. "Eddie, you have to tell me exactly where this is." He hesitated. "Liz, if you go there alone, you'll get yourself killed. Just tell me," I insisted. He scribbled an address on a piece of paper and handed it to me. "Be careful," he said. "These guys aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of losing control." That night, I couldn't shake the restlessness in my chest. Rosales' voice echoed in my mind. "Don't do anything reckless." But this wasn't about recklessness. It was about ending the fear. I checked on Sarah one last time before I left. She was asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. For a moment I stood in the doorway watching her, praying silently. Then I grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and the small pistol I'd kept locked away for years. The drive to the docks took 20 minutes. The streets were nearly empty, the air heavy with mist from the river. I parked 2 blocks away and moved quietly through the shadows. The warehouse loomed ahead, massive, decaying, the kind of place that swallowed sound. I could see faint light through one of the windows. Voices carried faintly from inside, low, harsh. I crept closer, heart hammering. Through a crack in the wall, I saw 3 men standing around a table talking. One of them was Trevor Knox. His massive frame was unmistakable. He was laughing, holding up a photo. I squinted, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of Sarah taken from outside our house. "Robert says we wait until next week," Trevor said. "He wants it done slow, wants her to feel it." My vision blurred with rage. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to act. But I forced myself to stay still. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone, started recording, zooming in on their faces. Then one of the men turned toward the window. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. "Someone's out there," he shouted. I spun and ran, boots splashing through puddles. Behind me, I heard them shouting, the sound of footsteps pounding against the concrete. A gunshot cracked the air, echoing across the empty docks. I ducked behind a rusted shipping container, gasping for breath. My phone was still recording in my hand. I couldn't stop shaking. Another shot rang out, this one closer. I looked up and saw headlights sweep across the alley. A car screeched to a stop, and 2 figures jumped out. One of them was Rosales. "Elizabeth!" he yelled. "Get down!" Officers swarmed in from every side. Within seconds, the warehouse was surrounded. I stayed crouched behind the container, heart racing as gunfire erupted. The confrontation lasted minutes, but felt like hours. Finally, silence. When Rosales found me, his face was pale. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. "You could have been killed." I swallowed hard. They had pictures of Sarah. They were planning something. He sighed, shaking his head. "We got Trevor." "He's alive." The others fled. "We'll find them." As they led me to his patrol car, I looked back at the warehouse. The broken glass, the flashing red lights, the smell of gunpowder. All of it burned into my memory. It wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time in years, I felt something fierce inside me. A spark of power, of defiance. They had hunted us for too long. Now, I was hunting back. The morning after the raid at the docks, the sky was gray and heavy, like the world itself hadn't caught its breath from the night before. I sat in Rosales' office with a bandage wrapped around my arm where a piece of glass had cut me. He stood by the window, silent for a moment, then turned to face me. "We got lucky last night," he said. "If we'd been 30 seconds later, you might not be sitting here." I stared at the cup of coffee in my hands, unable to meet his eyes. "Luck had nothing to do with it," I murmured. "Robert planned everything. Trevor was just his puppet." Rosales frowned. "Trevor's talking, but he's not giving us much. Keeps saying he's loyal, that Robert promised him a way out, money, protection. We'll break him eventually, but it's clear Robert's been orchestrating things from inside." I took a deep breath. How is that even possible? "He's in federal custody." Rosales' jaw tightened. "Money talks, Liz. People listen. We suspect he's got a contact inside the prison, someone smuggling messages in and out. We're trying to trace the flow, but it's messy." I looked out the window where rain began to fall in thin silver lines. "He's not just sending threats anymore," I said quietly. "He's testing how far he can reach. And when he figures out he can still touch us, he'll strike again." Rosales rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted. "We'll increase protection for Sarah. But you need to stay out of this. You're too close, emotionally and professionally. Promise me you won't go digging on your own again." I wanted to promise. I really did. But I couldn't. "I'll try," I said instead, and his sigh told me he knew exactly what that meant. When I got home, Sarah was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The news had already broken. Warehouse shootout linked to convicted abuser. Her name wasn't mentioned, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "people online are saying he might have had accomplices in other states. What if they come here?" I sat beside her and took her hand. "We're protected, sweetheart. Rosales has patrol cars watching the neighborhood." "That's not what I mean," she whispered. "Even if they arrest him, he'll still haunt me. Every noise, every car outside, I'll think it's him." I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face that together. One day at a time." That night, I lay in bed listening to the rain tapping against the windows. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. There was only one line. "You really thought you could stop me?" My heart stopped for a second. I called Rosales immediately, and he instructed me not to delete the message. They'd try to trace it. But deep down, I already knew they wouldn't find anything. Robert was too careful, too methodical. He wanted me to feel his presence, not catch it. By the next afternoon, Rosales called again. The number was untraceable. Burner phone used once and dumped. I closed my eyes. "He's taunting us." "Yeah," he said grimly. "But we've frozen his access to outside communication. That means whoever sent that message did it for him." That hit me harder than I expected. Someone close to us was feeding him information. Someone who knew our movements, our fear. I glanced around the house, suddenly feeling exposed. Later that evening, as I was making dinner, Sarah came downstairs, pale and trembling. "Mom, look at this." She handed me her phone. It was an email, sent from an address she didn't recognize. Attached was a photo, one taken that very morning. It was of her walking to her car, holding a cup of coffee. The subject line read, "Nice day for a drive, isn't it?" I felt the room spin for a moment. The picture wasn't blurry. It was close, personal. Whoever took it had been right outside our house. I grabbed my phone and called Rosales again. "He's watching us," I said, my voice breaking. "He knows where we are." Within the hour, officers were stationed in our yard, patrolling the street. But even with their presence, I could feel that invisible weight pressing down. The knowledge that no matter how many locks or alarms we had, someone had already breached the boundary once. I sat with Sarah on the couch until she finally fell asleep, her head resting on my shoulder. Then I quietly slipped away and went into the garage where my old police files were stored. I pulled out everything I could find about Robert's associates: names, numbers, mugshots. I was looking for patterns for anyone who might have slipped through the cracks. And then I saw it. A name that sent a chill down my spine. Officer Dale Hansen. He'd worked courthouse security during the trial. There had been rumors years ago about him taking bribes, but nothing ever stuck. I remembered seeing him that day in court, standing by the door, nodding to Robert's lawyer. My pulse quickened. If Robert had a contact inside the system, Hansen fit the bill perfectly. I snapped a photo of the file and texted it to Rosales with a single line. "You might want to look into this one." The next morning, Rosales confirmed my suspicions. "We pulled Hansen's financial records," he said. "He's received multiple deposits from offshore accounts over the past month. No legitimate source. We've suspended him pending investigation." "So it's him?" I asked. "We can't prove it yet," he replied, "but it's damn close." I exhaled shakily. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the walls were starting to close in on Robert, but relief didn't last long. That evening, as the sun began to set, a car pulled up in front of our house. It was black, tinted windows, engine running. The patrol officer on duty approached cautiously, shining his flashlight. I watched from the window, holding my breath. Suddenly, the car sped off, tires screeching. The officer ran back to his vehicle and followed, but minutes later, Rosales called with the update. The car had vanished. No plates, no trace. I turned to Sarah, who was standing behind me, pale and shaking. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "He'll keep finding ways to reach us." That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went down to the basement, turned on the single hanging light, and opened the evidence box from the warehouse. Inside were photos, files, and one USB drive the detectives hadn't processed yet. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, then displayed a series of video clips, grainy security footage from the warehouse's interior. In one of the clips, Robert's voice echoed faintly through the speakers. He was on a phone call saying, "When the time's right, we end it." "She took my life away. I'll take hers in return." I froze. He wasn't just talking about Sarah anymore. He meant me. I backed away from the screen, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. That's when the power flickered. Once, twice, then the room went dark. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone, but before I could turn on the flashlight, I heard something, a faint creak from the stairwell above. Someone was inside the house. I gripped the small pistol in my jacket pocket and moved slowly toward the shadows, my breath shallow. The air was thick with silence, the kind that presses against your skin. Another creak. This time closer. I raised the gun, every instinct alive again. "Who's there?" I said, my voice steady but low. No answer. Then a flash of movement in the corner, a shadow darting across the wall. My finger tightened on the trigger. When the light suddenly flickered back on, I saw it. The front door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. On the floor by the stairs lay a single photograph. I bent down to pick it up, and when I saw what it was, my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of me, standing at Sarah's graduation 10 years ago, smiling, arm around her shoulders. But someone had drawn a red X through my face, and written beneath it in neat black letters were the words, "Soon." The red X over my face burned into my mind all night long. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing it. Every creak in the house made my muscles tighten. Every gust of wind against the window felt like footsteps in the dark. By dawn, I was sitting at the kitchen table, gun beside me, the photograph in front of me like a declaration of war. When Rosales arrived, his expression hardened the moment he saw it. "He's escalating," he said quietly. "This isn't a threat anymore. It's a promise." I could tell by the tightness in his jaw that he was afraid. Not for himself, but for us. "We're moving you and Sarah to a safe house until we can get a handle on this. Pack only what you need." I wanted to protest, to tell him we couldn't just run every time Robert's shadow moved. But deep down I knew this wasn't about pride anymore. It was survival. Sarah was pale as she stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. "Mom," she whispered, "what if this never ends? What if no matter where we go, he finds us again?" I knelt beside her and took her hands. "Then we'll keep fighting. Because he's counting on fear to make us freeze, and that's the one thing we can't let happen." Her eyes glistened, but she nodded. By mid-morning, an unmarked SUV was parked outside, ready to take us to a location Rosales refused to disclose over the phone. The ride was silent. Rain streaked down the windows as the city faded behind us, replaced by long stretches of highway and pine trees. I tried to calm the storm in my chest by focusing on small things, the rhythm of the windshield wipers, the hum of the tires, but my thoughts kept circling back to the photo. Someone had been close enough to take it from our family albums. That meant our house had already been breached before last night. That meant whoever was working with Robert had access to everything. When we reached the safe house, a cabin tucked deep in the woods, it looked peaceful enough, but I could tell Sarah wasn't fooled. The agent stationed outside gave a polite nod, but his eyes never stopped scanning the tree line. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. "We'll be safe here," Rosales assured us before leaving. "No one knows this location except my team." As the SUV disappeared down the gravel road, the silence settled heavy again. The next few days blurred together. We stayed inside mostly, cooking simple meals, playing old board games, pretending it was just another quiet retreat. But every night, I found myself standing by the window, scanning the dark woods, half expecting to see headlights flash through the trees. On the fourth night, Sarah woke me up. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "The lights outside, they just went out." I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed. The cameras were dead, static. My stomach twisted. We moved quickly, the way training had taught me years ago. I ushered her into the back room, told her to lock the door, and called Rosales. No answer. Then I called again. Nothing. The line was dead. I looked at the front door. It was still locked, but the silence outside had shifted. There's a kind of quiet that isn't natural, the kind that comes right before something breaks. And then I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside. Someone was walking toward the house. I ducked behind the window, pistol drawn. Through the sliver of curtain, I saw a silhouette move past the porch light, the shape of a man, tall, wearing a hood. He stopped by the door. My finger hovered near the trigger. The doorknob turned slowly, testing the lock. Then, in a low voice, I heard him whisper, "Liz." My heart seized. It wasn't Robert's voice. It was trembling, uncertain. "It's me," the voice said again. "Trevor." I hesitated, keeping the gun steady. "How did you find us?" I demanded. He pressed his hand against the glass. "You have to listen to me. He's going to kill you both. He's not in prison anymore." The room spun for a moment. "What are you talking about?" I hissed. "He escaped 2 nights ago," Trevor said, his breath fogging up the glass. "He had help from inside. Someone switched transport routes during a medical transfer. He's free, Liz. He's coming for you." Before I could respond, headlights flashed through the trees again, this time from 2 different directions. Trevor turned sharply. "It's too late. He found me. He's been tracking me since I tried to warn you." Panic surged through me. "Get inside!" I shouted. But it was too late. A gunshot cracked through the night, echoing off the trees. Trevor's body hit the porch, motionless. I dropped to the floor, dragging Sarah into the hallway as glass shattered above us. For the next few seconds, the world was nothing but chaos. Shouts outside, more gunfire, the thud of boots. I grabbed Sarah's hand and ran toward the back exit. But before we reached it, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking our path. Robert. He looked older, leaner, but his eyes burned with the same cold hatred. "You should have stayed quiet," he said softly. "You ruined everything I built." I raised my gun, but he was faster. He kicked it from my hand, sending it skidding across the floor. Sarah screamed, and in that split second, I lunged at him, clawing, shoving, anything to keep him from reaching her. He slammed me against the wall, his hand closing around my throat. "You think you can protect her?" he hissed. "You couldn't even protect yourself." My vision blurred, but I could hear sirens in the distance. Faint, growing louder. Rosales must have traced the signal after all. With what little strength I had left, I drove my knee into his ribs. He stumbled, and I grabbed the nearby lamp, smashing it over his shoulder. He roared in pain. "Sarah, run!" I shouted. She bolted toward the door just as the front of the cabin burst open. Agents flooded in, shouting commands. Robert spun toward them, gun raised, but Rosales was faster. 2 shots. One hit the wall. The other struck Robert square in the chest. He fell to the floor, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. Rosales rushed to me, helping me to my feet as agents secured the area. I looked down at Robert, his lips moving soundlessly, blood pooling beneath him. He tried to speak, but the words never came. His eyes glazed over, and then he was still. The entire cabin was filled with flashing lights and radio chatter, but all I could focus on was Sarah, kneeling in the corner, sobbing. I went to her and wrapped my arms around her, feeling her tremble against me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "It's over, right?" I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. It's over." But in truth, I wasn't sure. Even after Robert's body was taken away, even after the agents swept the woods and declared the area secure, a strange emptiness lingered. When Rosales walked me to the ambulance, he gave me a weary look. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. I nodded, but the words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like a verdict. A week later, we were back home, or what was left of home. The house felt different now, smaller somehow. The air still carried the faint smell of fear. Sarah spent most of her time sitting on the porch, watching the street in silence. One evening, I joined her. The sky was pink and gold, the kind of soft sunset that used to bring peace. "You think it's really over?" she asked again. I looked out at the horizon. "Maybe not completely," I said. But he doesn't get to own our lives anymore. Not our love, not our peace. She smiled faintly and leaned her head on my shoulder. The crickets started singing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to calm. Still, when I went inside that night and turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window, tired, but alive. And behind that reflection, just for a second, I thought I saw something move in the dark. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe some ghosts don't stay buried, no matter how many times you think the story's over. For weeks after the attack, sleep became a stranger to me. Every night I'd lie awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of dogs barking at nothing. I kept the gun on the nightstand, the curtains drawn tight. Sarah tried to move forward, bless her heart. She started therapy again, picked up her sketchbook, and filled pages with drawings of trees, birds, faces that always looked like they were about to speak but never could. I wanted to believe she was healing, but I could see the shadows still clinging to her eyes. One morning, while making coffee, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was dark blue with tinted windows. It wasn't one I recognized from our neighborhood. It sat there all morning, engine off, then disappeared by noon. The next day it was back again. My chest tightened. I called Rosales. "Could just be someone new on the block," he said, though I could hear the unease in his voice. "Still, I'll have a patrol swing by." But when the cruiser came, the car was gone. That evening, I walked out onto the porch, pretending to water the plants, and slipped my phone into my pocket to record. The air felt heavy, the way it does before a storm. I scanned the street, pretending not to look suspicious, until I saw it. Just a flicker of light reflecting off glass from a few houses down. A camera lens. Someone was watching us. My heart pounded as I whispered, "Sarah, get inside." She didn't ask questions. That night, Rosales came by himself, no uniform, just a worried look. "Liz," he said, taking off his cap, "I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." He handed me a file. Inside were 2 photos, one of Robert's body in the morgue, and another of a report stamped inconclusive. "What does that mean?" I asked. Rosales sighed. "His fingerprints didn't match the database record exactly. We think the man who died that night might not have been him." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. "You're saying he's still out there?" Rosales rubbed his forehead. "We don't know yet. It's possible he bribed someone inside the prison system, maybe even switched identities before the escape. We're digging, but the trail's messy." My throat went dry. "You told me it was over." His eyes softened. "I believed it was. I wanted it to be." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at those photos until the edges blurred. The fear I'd buried began clawing its way back. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I started checking locks twice, sometimes 3 times, before bed. Sarah noticed. "Mom," she said quietly one night, "you're scaring me." I tried to smile. "I'm just being careful." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just caution, it was obsession. 2 weeks later, Sarah came home from her art therapy group, her face pale. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "someone followed me after class." A man in a dark jacket. He didn't say anything, just stood across the parking lot watching. I felt my stomach drop. "Did you see his face?" She shook her head. "No, but he had the same build as Dad." That night we packed again. I didn't even call Rosales this time. I couldn't bear to wait for permission or paperwork. We drove for hours through back roads, staying under the radar, until we reached an old cottage my friend Camille owned near the river. It wasn't fancy, just 1 bedroom, peeling paint, a creaky floor, but it was far enough from everything that I could breathe again. Or at least pretend to. The next morning, I woke to find a folded piece of paper slipped under the front door. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sentence written in Robert's handwriting. "You can't hide what belongs to me." My heart stopped. There was no signature, no name, just that one line. I sat down on the floor, paper clutched to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. For years I'd fought this man, this darkness, this endless cycle of fear and control. But now it felt like I'd been pulled right back to the beginning. Sarah found me like that. "Mom, what is it?" she asked. I showed her the note. Her face went blank. Then she whispered, "He's not dead." I wanted to say no, to tell her it was just a cruel prank, but the handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. "We'll call Ruthless," I said finally, forcing calm into my voice. "He'll trace it." But when I dialed, there was only static. I tried again, nothing. We were too deep in the valley for signal. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof, and lightning flashed against the window. Sarah fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. I sat beside her, clutching a flashlight, eyes fixed on the door. I thought about everything we'd lost, the home, the peace, the years swallowed by trauma. Then, through the noise of the storm, I heard it. A soft knock. Not thunder, not wind. A deliberate, steady knock. I froze. The knock came again. 3 times. I stood slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached for the doorknob but stopped. Then, just as lightning flashed again, I saw the outline of a man through the curtain, tall, broad-shouldered, standing perfectly still. I backed away, heart racing. "Sarah!" I hissed. She stirred but didn't wake. The knock came again, harder this time. I grabbed the gun from the drawer, cocked it, and shouted, "I'm armed!" "Leave now!" Silence followed, then a low, mocking laugh that sent chills through me. "Always the fighter, Liz," the voice said through the door. "You haven't changed." It was him, Robert. Before I could react, the window shattered behind me. I spun around, glass spraying across the room. 2 men in dark clothing climbed through, faces masked. I fired once, hitting the wall near them. They ducked, shouting, "Sarah, run!" I screamed. She bolted toward the hallway, barefoot, crying. One of the men lunged at me. I swung the flashlight, hitting him across the jaw, then kicked the second one away. But there were too many. Robert stepped through the door, calm, almost casual. His face was gaunt, a scar running down his temple, but his eyes still burned with that same cold fire. "You made me into this," he said. "You took everything from me, Liz. My home, my life, my name." I aimed the gun at him. "You did that yourself." He smiled, slow and cruel. "Maybe, but I'm here to take it back." Before he could move, headlights flared outside, bright, blinding. Sirens. Rosalis's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Robert Hayes! Drop your weapon!" Robert turned, fury twisting his face. "You called them," he snarled. I didn't answer. I fired, grazing his shoulder. He staggered, growling in pain. His men panicked, scrambling toward the windows, but SWAT was already breaking through the back door. Chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, flashing lights. In the middle of it all, I saw Sarah crouched in the corner, hands over her ears, sobbing. I ran to her, shielded her with my body, whispering, "It's okay, baby. It's almost over." The gunfire stopped. For a moment, everything went still. I turned my head just in time to see Robert on his knees, bleeding, surrounded by officers. His eyes found mine through the haze of smoke. "You'll never be free of me," he rasped. And then, before anyone could stop him, he raised his gun to his own chest and pulled the trigger. The echo of the shot seemed to last forever. When it finally faded, I realized I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Rosales rushed to us, helping me up, his voice distant and muffled through the ringing in my ears. Paramedics stormed in, officers shouted commands. Flashlights cut through the smoke. But all I could see was Sarah's face pressed into my shoulder, and all I could think was, maybe this time, it's really over. The days after Robert's death moved in slow motion, as if time itself was exhausted. The police sealed off the cottage for investigation, and Sarah and I were relocated yet again, this time to a quiet rehabilitation center by the coast. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the sound of waves echoed against the cliffs. It should have felt like peace, but at first it only felt like silence. Too deep, too empty, too fragile to trust. Sarah spent her mornings painting by the window, her brush moving in slow, deliberate strokes. She no longer drew faces. Instead, she painted skies, wide, endless skies filled with light breaking through clouds. When I asked her why, she said softly, "Because it feels like breathing again." I smiled, but the truth was, I hadn't learned to breathe yet. I kept expecting another knock at the door, another ghost from the past. Rosalie's visited a few days later. His face looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his voice carried the same quiet strength. "It's over this time," he said. DNA confirmed it. "There's no mistake." I nodded, though I still found it hard to believe that evil could finally stop moving. "You were right about him from the beginning," he added. "You saved lives, Liz, including your daughter's." But the word saved felt too heavy. Too absolute, because part of me knew there were pieces of us that would never fully return to what they were. That kind of trauma doesn't vanish when the danger does. It lingers in the mind, whispers in dreams, hides in every creak of the floor at night. Still, something inside me had changed. The fear was no longer in control. For the first time, I felt the quiet pulse of strength beneath the pain, the kind that grows only after you've been broken open completely. A week later, I decided to take Sarah down to the beach. The wind was soft that evening, the sky melting into gold and lavender. She ran barefoot along the shore, laughing as the waves chased her. I watched her from a distance, and tears blurred my eyes, not from sadness but from something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Pure, unfiltered gratitude. When she came back, she sat beside me in the sand and said, "Do you think we'll ever stop remembering?" I thought about that for a while. "Maybe we're not meant to forget," I said finally. "Maybe we're meant to remember but differently, not as victims, but as survivors." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "Then I want to remember with peace." That night, after Sarah went to sleep, I sat by the open window and let the sea air fill the room. I thought about everything we had lost, our home, our sense of safety, the version of our lives that would never come back. But I also thought about everything we had gained. A deeper love, a courage I never knew existed, and a truth that burned quietly in my heart. That light always finds its way through the cracks. No matter how deep the darkness tries to bury it, I began writing again. Not reports, not statements, but letters. Letters to women who were still living in silence, trapped in fear. Letters to mothers who thought it was too late to protect their children. Letters to my younger self, who once believed love meant enduring pain. I wrote until dawn, words spilling like healing rain, because I finally understood that surviving wasn't just about staying alive, it was about learning to live again, without shame, without apology, without fear. Weeks turned into months. The investigation closed, and the newspapers called it a story of courage and justice. But behind those headlines were all the quiet moments the world would never see. The nights Sarah woke up crying, the mornings I sat staring at coffee gone cold, the days when forgiveness felt impossible. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight road. It's a long, uneven path that bends and breaks and still somehow leads you home. One morning, Sarah came to me holding a small envelope. Inside was a flyer for an art exhibit in town titled Reclaimed Light. Her therapist had submitted her paintings. "You don't have to go," she said nervously, "but I want to try." I smiled through tears. "You should, honey. That's what brave looks like." At the exhibit, I stood among strangers staring at her art. Skies of fire, oceans of hope, the silhouette of a woman standing on a cliff with her arms raised toward the light. The label beneath read simply, "For my mother, who taught me that broken things can still shine." I had to step outside to catch my breath. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something profound. This story, the pain, the survival, the fight, was never just about Robert's cruelty. It was about every person who's ever been told to stay silent. It was about the courage it takes to speak, to leave, to rebuild. It was about how love, real, unselfish love, can outlast even the darkest storms. When I got home that evening, I started recording a message for a support network that helps survivors of abuse. My voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier as I spoke. If you're listening right now, I said, and you feel trapped, if someone's making you believe you'll never be free, listen to me. You can survive this. You can start again. You are stronger than the fear they've built around you. The pain you carry doesn't define you, it refines you. Please don't stay silent. Reach out. Speak. Because every time you speak, the darkness loses its power. As I finished the recording, I felt something lift inside me, a weight I'd carried for far too long. I wasn't the same woman I was when this story began. I wasn't just Elizabeth anymore. I was someone who had walked through the fire and learned to see light not as the absence of darkness, but as its answer. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, through every twist, every heartbreak, every flicker of hope, then I want you to take this lesson with you. No matter how shattered life feels, no matter how far gone you think you are, redemption is always closer than it seems. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering with grace. It's standing in the ashes and choosing to build again. So if this story has touched you, if it made you feel seen, if it reminded you that even in pain there's purpose, then don't leave quietly. Share it. Comment. Let others know they're not alone. And subscribe to this channel, not just to follow stories like mine, but to be part of a space where we fight fear with truth, where we turn wounds into wisdom, where we remind the world that broken hearts can still shine. Because the light we find in our darkest hours isn't meant to stay hidden. It's meant to be shared.